"Mom, you're embarrassing us." The words sliced through the restaurant's ambient chatter like a blade through silk. Maria Fletcher's weathered hands trembled as she set down her water glass, the ice cubes clinking against the sides like tiny funeral bells. Her son Travis, Dr. Travis Fletcher now, she reminded herself, leaned back in his leather booth, his manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table with the same impatience he'd shown as a child when she couldn't afford the toys his friends had. "I just thought maybe we could," Maria began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could what?" Angela's voice cut across the table, sharp as winter wind. Her daughter's perfectly contoured face twisted with an expression Maria had never seen before, disgust mixed with something far worse. "Shame. Show up to my charity gala looking like that?" Maria glanced down at her faded cardigan, the one she'd mended 3 times now, the small tear near the elbow hidden beneath her trembling palm. The same cardigan she'd worn to Travis's medical school graduation, to Angela's wedding, to little Daniel's first tech company launch. Back then, they'd hugged her despite the worn fabric. Back then, she'd been their hero. "The Pemberton family will be there," Angela continued, her manicured nails tapping against her designer purse. "Edward's partners from the law firm. People who matter, Mom. People who could help Edward make senior partner." Travis nodded, adjusting his Rolex, the same wrist where he'd once worn the plastic watch Maria had saved 3 months to buy him for his 10th birthday. "She's right, Mom. Image matters in my practice too. My patients, they expect a certain standard." Daniel, her baby, her youngest at 32, hadn't even looked up from his phone. The blue light cast shadows across his face, making him look like a stranger. "Can't we just send money or something? I've got a conference call with Singapore in 20 minutes. The restaurant blurred through Maria's unshed tears, the soft lighting and quiet conversations of other families. Real families, becoming a watercolor wash of everything she'd lost. 2 years ago, she'd been Maria Fletcher, the single mother who'd raised 3 exceptional children after losing her husband when they were barely toddlers. The woman who'd worked 3 jobs, sold her wedding ring, taken out loans she was still paying off. Also, her children could have the lives she'd never dreamed possible for herself. Now she was Maria the burden. Maria the embarrassment. Maria the woman whose own children couldn't bear to be seen with her. "I understand," she whispered, though the words felt like swallowing glass. I've been staying at the shelter downtown, and I thought maybe." "The shelter?" Travis's voice cracked with horror, but not the kind that came from concern. It was the horror of association, of connection to something that might taint his carefully constructed reputation. "Jesus, Mom, what if someone sees you there? What if they connect you to us?" Angela's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. "You can't be serious. The downtown community shelter? That's where the news crews go when they want to do those poverty pieces around Christmas." "I won't tell anyone you're my children," Maria said quietly, the words falling from her lips like autumn leaves, dry, brittle, and easily swept away. "I promise." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, other families laughed and shared stories, parents beaming with pride at their children's accomplishments, children showing genuine affection for their aging parents. Maria watched a young man help his elderly mother cut her steak, watched a daughter show her father photos on her phone, watched love in its purest, most uncomplicated form. None of her children moved to help her stand when she rose from the booth. None of them called her back when she walked toward the door. None of them followed when she stepped into the cold October night, pulling her thin coat around shoulders that had once carried the weight of their entire world. Alone, always alone. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to my channel, your safe space for stories that touch the deepest parts of our hearts. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found us. And if you're part of our amazing family already, you know we're about to dive into something that's going to make us feel everything. Before we continue Maria's heartbreaking journey, I need to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below, and tell me how you're doing. Really, I want to know. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please do it right now. These stories need to be heard, need to reach the hearts that need them most. Your subscription helps us grow this beautiful community of people who believe in the power of love, resilience, and second chances. Now, let me ask you something that's going to stay with you throughout this entire story. What would you do if the people you sacrificed everything for decided you were no longer worth their love? Maria stood outside the restaurant, watching her breath form small clouds in the autumn air. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see her children had already resumed their meal, their conversation animated now that the source of their discomfort had been removed. Travis was laughing at something on his phone. Angela was fixing her lipstick in a compact mirror. Daniel had finally looked up from his screen, but only to signal the waiter for another drink. They looked relieved. She pulled her phone from her purse, an old flip phone that embarrassed Daniel whenever he saw it, and stared at the screen. 3 contacts under family. 3 people who had once clung to her legs when thunderstorms raged, who had once brought her dandelions they'd picked from the neighbor's yard, who had once promised they'd take care of her when she got old. But they'd been so young when their father died. Travis barely 3, Angela 18 months, Daniel just 6 months old. They didn't remember promising anything. They barely remembered having a father at all. The phone rang twice before Travis answered. "What is it, Mom?" "Not, are you okay?" "Not, did you get home safely?" Just the weary tone of someone handling an inconvenience. "I left my cardigan," she lied. She hadn't left anything. She never did anymore, had learned to travel light, to need nothing, to take up no space. "The blue one. I'll have Angela mail it to you." "To where, Travis?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, raw and desperate. "I don't have an address anymore. Remember?" The pause stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. "We'll figure something out," he said finally. "Look, Mom, we're not trying to hurt you. We've worked so hard to get where we are. You understand that, right? You wouldn't want us to throw it all away." Throw it all away. As if loving her, claiming her, helping her would be throwing away everything they'd achieved. As if she was the antithesis of success rather than its foundation. "I understand," she whispered. "Good. We'll call you soon, okay?" They wouldn't. She knew they wouldn't. The same way she knew that if she died tonight, alone on these cold streets, they'd find a way to blame her for the inconvenience of having to arrange a funeral. Maria closed the phone and began walking. Past the gleaming storefronts where she could no longer afford to shop, past the coffee shops where she used to treat herself to a latte on special occasions, past the bus stops where she now waited with her meager possessions in a worn canvas bag. The downtown shelter would be opening its doors in 2 hours. Until then, she would walk and remember, and try not to think about the children who had once been her entire world. The babies she'd rocked to sleep alone, the toddlers she'd comforted through nightmares when there was no father to help, the children she'd raised single-handedly for over 30 years. She had no idea that her entire life was about to change with a single phone call. She had no idea that sometimes the people who matter most are not the ones who share your blood, but the ones who recognize your worth when everyone else has chosen to forget it. And she had absolutely no idea that Victor Holloway, the gentle, forgotten man she'd comforted in his final days at Sunset Manor, had been watching and listening and remembering what real love looked like. But she was about to find out. 3 blocks from the restaurant, Maria's legs finally gave out. She sank onto a bus bench, her body folding inward like paper caught in rain. The streetlight above flickered intermittently, casting her shadow in stuttering fragments against the cracked sidewalk. She closed her eyes and let herself remember when love hadn't felt like begging. 32 years ago. Michael Fletcher had been dead for exactly 2 weeks when Maria realized she was completely alone in the world. Travis was barely 3 years old, Angela 18 months, and Daniel just 6 months. 3 babies who needed everything and a mother who had nothing left to give except her own breaking heart. The funeral was over, the casseroles from neighbors had stopped coming, and the life insurance money, what little there was, would be gone within months. Maria sat at her kitchen table at 2 a.m., surrounded by bills she couldn't pay and baby bottles she needed to wash, listening to Daniel cry in his crib while the older children slept fitfully in their shared bedroom. She'd never felt so terrified in her life. But as she looked at those bills, at the eviction notice that had arrived that morning, at the empty refrigerator and the babies depending on her for everything, Maria Fletcher made a decision that would define the next 3 decades of her life. She would not let her children suffer because their father was gone. She would not let them feel shame for being fatherless and poor. She would be enough, mother and father both, whatever it took. 28 years ago. 8-year-old Travis came home with a black eye and a torn school uniform, the third fight that month. Maria was at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills she couldn't pay and job applications she'd filled out in desperation. 3 rejection letters lay beside her cold cup of coffee, the same struggle she'd faced every day for the past 6 years, ever since becoming a single mother. "Mama," Travis had whispered, his split lip trembling. "Bobby Patterson said we don't have a daddy to protect us. He said his dad said we're probably going to lose our house, 'cause you can't take care of us by yourself." Maria had looked at her son, her brilliant, sensitive boy who barely remembered his father but felt his absence every day, and renewed the vow she'd made at Michael's graveside. She would not let her children feel the shame of being different. She would not let them grow up believing they were less than anyone else's children just because their daddy couldn't protect them anymore. Whatever it took. "Come here, baby," she'd whispered, pulling him into her arms. "Mama's got a plan." The plan had been 3 jobs, the same grueling schedule she'd maintained since Michael's death, but now with even more determination. Early morning cleaning offices downtown, afternoon shift at the diner on 5th Street, weekend catering gigs that kept her on her feet for 12 hours straight. Maria would collapse into bed at midnight and wake at 4 a.m., her body screaming, her hands cracked from cleaning chemicals, her feet swollen from standing. But she was all her children had, their only protector, their only provider, their only parent. But Travis never came home with another black eye. Angela never had to wear thrift store clothes to school. Daniel never had to explain why there wasn't food in his lunchbox. Maria had made sure of that. When Travis showed aptitude for science, Maria worked extra shifts to pay for tutoring. When Angela wanted to take dance lessons like her friends, Maria sold her mother's jewelry, the only thing of value she'd inherited, to pay for classes and recitals. When Daniel's teacher said he was gifted with computers, Maria took out a loan she couldn't afford to buy him his first laptop. She'd given them everything. Not just money, though she'd given that too, scraping together every penny from her multiple jobs. She'd given them her dreams, her youth, her health, her hope. She'd given them the father and mother both, showing up to every game, every recital, every graduation as their sole champion. She'd been their protector when nightmares came, their cheerleader when they doubted themselves, their safe harbor in a world that seemed designed to remind them they were different. The one who loved them unconditionally, even when that love became a burden they no longer wanted to carry. Especially then. The shelter doors opened at 9 p.m. sharp, and Maria was the 3rd person in line. She recognized the volunteer at the check-in table, Grace Fletcher, a nursing student who'd been working here for months. Grace's smile was genuine, untainted by pity or judgment, and it was sometimes the only kindness Maria experienced all day. "Evening, Mrs. Fletcher," Grace said softly, her voice carrying the gentleness that came from truly seeing people. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, dear." The lie came easily now, polished smooth by repetition. "How are your studies going?" Grace's face brightened. "I passed my pediatric rotation. I get to work in the children's ward next month." "Oh, that's wonderful," Maria said, and meant it. "You'll be perfect with the little ones. You have such a gentle heart." It was a conversation they'd had variations of dozens of times. 2 women from completely different worlds, connected by nothing more than basic human decency. Grace never asked probing questions about Maria's family, never offered platitudes about things getting better. She simply treated Maria like a person worthy of respect. Maria wished her own children could see how easy it was. "Bed 23 tonight," Grace said, handing her a towel and a small bar of soap. "Right by the window. I know you like the fresh air." The shelter was full, as it always was when the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. Maria made her way to bed 23, past rows of women whose stories she'd learned in fragments. Dorothy Whitmore, 73, whose children lived in other states and never called. Regina Montgomery, 68, whose son had stolen her retirement savings to feed his gambling addiction. Linda Prescott, 59, whose daughter-in-law had convinced her son that his mother was toxic and needed to be cut from their lives. They were Maria's family now, these forgotten mothers, these discarded women who'd once been the centers of their children's universes. They shared stories in whispers after lights out, passing tissues and understanding between the narrow beds. They were the sisterhood of the abandoned, bound together by the common wound of children who'd decided their mothers were disposable. "How'd it go tonight?" Dorothy whispered from the bed next to hers. Maria stared at the ceiling, where water stains formed shapes that reminded her of the crayon drawings her children used to make. "They don't want me at Angela's charity event. I might embarrass them." "Their loss," Regina murmured from across the aisle. "My Harold used to be ashamed of my accent, said it made him sound like he came from trash. Funny how quick they forget who changed their diapers and kissed their scraped knees. Remember when they used to fight over who got to sit next to Mama at dinner?" Linda added, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Now they fight over who has to take my phone calls." Maria turned onto her side, clutching the thin pillow against her chest. Through the window, she could see the city lights twinkling like fallen stars. Each one a warm home, a family gathering, a mother being loved and valued and remembered. Somewhere out there, Travis was probably reading bedtime stories to his stepchildren. Sarah's children from her first marriage, the kids he'd helped raise but never let meet their step-grandmother. Did he use the same voices Maria had used for him? The growling bear voice for Papa Bear, the squeaky mouse voice for Cinderella's friends? Did he remember how she used to trace letters on his back when he couldn't sleep, teaching him to spell love and brave and special across his small shoulder blades? Somewhere out there, Angela was probably tucking her own children into bed with silk pajamas and organic cotton sheets. Did she sing the lullabies Maria had sung to her? Did she remember how Maria used to braid her hair every morning before school, even when Maria's hands were so tired they shook from working 3 jobs to keep them fed? Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably working late on his computer, building the empire Maria had dreamed of for him when she'd saved for months to buy him that first laptop. Did he remember how she used to sit beside him for hours, asking questions about programming that she didn't understand, just so he'd know someone cared about his passions? She doubted it. Children, Maria had learned, had selective memories when it came to their mother's sacrifices. They remembered the times you said no, but not the 100 times you said yes. They remembered the birthday party that wasn't perfect, but not the 3 jobs you worked to pay for it. They remembered feeling embarrassed by your old car, but not the years you walked to work so they could have one. They remembered everything that made them feel small, and nothing that made them feel loved. At least hers did. But tomorrow was another day, Maria told herself as she closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would wake up, fold her blanket neatly, thank Grace for her kindness, and step back into a world that had decided she didn't matter. Tomorrow she would keep loving children who no longer wanted her love. Children who'd never known their father, who'd had only her to depend on their entire lives, and who'd decided that wasn't enough. Tomorrow she would continue being the mother they'd trained her to be. Invisible, undemanding, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they might throw her way. She had no idea that tomorrow, everything would change. She had no idea that 20 miles away, in a law office that never closed, Attorney Harrison Reed was working late, preparing to make a phone call that would shake the foundations of everything her children believed about worth, love, and the price of abandoning the only parent they'd ever really known. She had no idea that Victor Holloway's final gift was about to reveal who her children really were, and who she really was too. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Maria's eyes snapped open in the pre-dawn darkness of the shelter, her heart hammering against her ribs. Around her, 40 other women slept on, lost in dreams of better days or nightmares of worse ones. The ancient flip phone buzzed against the metal nightstand like an angry insect, its harsh ringtone cutting through the silence. Nobody called Maria at 6:47 a.m. Nobody called Maria at all, unless it was one of her children with a crisis they needed her to solve from a distance, usually involving childcare requests she couldn't fulfill because she had no home to bring the grandchildren she'd never been allowed to meet. She fumbled for the phone, her arthritic fingers clumsy with sleep and sudden fear. The number on the tiny screen was unfamiliar, but local. Maria's first thought was hospital. Had something happened to one of her children? Her second thought was worse. Had they finally decided to have her declared mentally incompetent, as Angela had threatened during their last argument? "Hello," she whispered, slipping out of bed and padding toward the bathroom so she wouldn't wake her sleeping neighbors. "Mrs. Fletcher? Mrs. Maria Elizabeth Fletcher?" The voice was professional, male, with the careful diction of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news. A lawyer, Maria realized, her stomach dropping like a stone. This was it. Her children had found a way to have her committed, or declared unfit, or... Yes, this is Maria Fletcher. Mrs. Fletcher, my name is Harrison Reed. I'm an attorney with Reed, Caldwell and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Victor Holloway. Do you have a few minutes to speak privately? Victor Holloway. The name hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and flooding her with memories so vivid she had to lean against the bathroom wall for support. Victor, sweet, gentle Victor with his trembling hands and forgotten children. Victor who'd spent his final months at Sunset Manor, abandoned by a son and daughter who were too busy with their important lives to visit a dying father. Victor who'd become Maria's friend during the 18 months she'd worked as a care aide at the nursing home, before the corruption scandal that had cost her the job and left her homeless. Mr. Holloway? Maria's voice cracked. He passed away almost 2 years ago. I was there when... She stopped, swallowing hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. I held his hand when he died. His children never came. Yes, ma'am. I'm aware of the circumstances of Mr. Holloway's passing, and I'm familiar with your connection to him during his final days. Harrison Reed's voice softened slightly, taking on a warmth that seemed genuine. Mrs. Fletcher, I need to inform you that you are the primary beneficiary of Mr. Holloway's estate. The words didn't make sense. They bounced off Maria's consciousness like rain on a windshield, sliding away before she could grasp their meaning. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Holloway left you everything, Mrs. Fletcher. His entire estate. We've been trying to locate you for nearly 2 years. Your former employer at Sunset Manor had an old address that was no longer valid, and frankly, we'd begun to fear that that we might not find you in time. Maria's legs gave out. She slid down the bathroom wall until she was sitting on the cold linoleum floor, the phone pressed so tightly to her ear that it hurt. That's not possible, she whispered. Victor barely knew me. We talk sometimes. I made sure he wasn't alone when the other aides were too busy. I read to him from the newspaper, helped him with his crossword puzzles when his eyes got bad. That's all. Mrs. Fletcher, Harrison Reed said gently. According to Mr. Holloway's will, that was everything. You showed him kindness when his own family had forgotten him. You treated him with dignity when everyone else saw only a burden to be managed. You gave him the gift of human connection in his final days. Maria closed her eyes, remembering. Victor in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at the parking lot where his children never came. Victor crying silently while other residents received visitors on Sundays. Victor's face lighting up whenever Maria entered his room, as if she were the most important person in the world. Just like her own children used to look at her, before they grew up and decided she wasn't worth their time. You made him feel like he mattered, Harrison continued. His will specifically states that you were the only person who saw him as a human being worthy of love and respect. He watched you, Mrs. Fletcher. He saw how you treated everyone, not just him, but all the forgotten people in that place. He saw your heart. But I don't understand. His estate, you said, but Victor lived in a nursing home. He didn't have money. His children put him there because they said they couldn't afford. Mrs. Fletcher. Harrison's voice was kind but firm. Victor Holloway was worth approximately $80 million. The bathroom spun around her. $80 million. The number was so large it felt fictional, like something from a movie or a dream. People like Maria didn't inherit $80 million. People like Maria died in shelters, forgotten and alone, while their children argued over who had to pay for the cheapest funeral. That's not possible, she repeated, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else's mouth. It's very possible and very real. Mr. Holloway made his fortune in manufacturing. Steel primarily, back in the 1970s and 80s. He was quite wealthy, but very private about it. His children knew he had money, of course, but they assumed it would come to them eventually. Let's say they were unpleasantly surprised by his final will and testament. They contested it? Extensively. For nearly 2 years. But Mr. Holloway was very thorough in his documentation of why he chose you over his biological children. He kept a journal during his final months, Mrs. Fletcher. He wrote about every kindness you showed him, Every moment you made him feel human again. He wrote about watching you care for other residents with the same gentle spirit, even when you were tired, even when others were rude to you. Maria thought of those long shifts at Sunset Manor, the ache in her feet, the heartbreak of seeing so many elderly people abandoned by families who'd grown tired of loving them. She'd loved that job, despite the low pay and difficult conditions. It had felt like purpose, like she was doing something that mattered. He wrote about overhearing your phone calls with your children, Harrison continued quietly, about how you never complained to them about your own struggles, even when they called to ask for favors you couldn't provide because you were working 3 jobs just to survive. He wrote about how you'd raised 3 children completely alone after your husband died, and how those children had grown up to abandon you just like his own had abandoned him. Maria's eyes filled with tears she didn't know she'd been holding back. Victor had seen it all, her loneliness, her pain, her unconditional love for children who no longer wanted it. He saw your sacrifices, Mrs. Fletcher. He saw who you really were. And he wanted to make sure the world saw it too. $80 million, she whispered, testing the words on her tongue. They still didn't feel real. 83,200,000 to be precise. Plus the house. House! His estate includes a property in Riverside Heights, a 6-bedroom colonial on 2 acres. It's been maintained by a property management company while we searched for you. It's quite beautiful, Mrs. Fletcher. I think you'll find it very comfortable. Riverside Heights. Maria knew the area, had driven through it sometimes when she was working for the catering company, marveling at the beautiful homes with their manicured lawns and circular driveways. The kind of neighborhood where her children lived now, where she'd been told she no longer belonged. I need you to come to my office today, Harrison was saying. There are papers to sign, accounts to access, decisions to be made. And Mrs. Fletcher? I'd recommend not sharing this information with anyone until we've had a chance to discuss how you'd like to handle things going forward. Handle things? Your family, Mrs. Fletcher. Your children. Word of an inheritance this large has a way of changing relationships. People you haven't heard from in years suddenly remember your phone number. Family members who've been absent develop. Maria thought of Travis's horrified expression when she'd mentioned the shelter. Angela's disgust at being associated with her poverty. Daniel's inability to look away from his phone long enough to see his mother's pain. They don't want anything to do with me, she said quietly. They don't want anything to do with poor Maria Fletcher, Harrison corrected gently. Rich Maria Fletcher might be an entirely different story. The truth of it hit her like cold water. Of course they would come back. Of course they would suddenly remember they had a mother, suddenly find time in their busy schedules, suddenly decide that maybe she wasn't such an embarrassment after all. But would it be love, or would it be the $83,200,000? Deep in her heart, she already knew the answer. What do I do? She whispered. First, you come to my office. We'll get the legal aspects sorted out, get you access to your accounts, get you the keys to your new home. Then, Mrs. Fletcher, you get to decide who deserves to be part of your new life. And if I want to test them, if I want to know whether they love me or just what I can give them. Harrison Reed's chuckle was warm and knowing. Mrs. Fletcher, Victor Holloway thought you might feel that way. He included some very specific suggestions in his will about how to handle fortune hunters, including family members who might suddenly develop renewed affection for you. He did. He was a wise man who'd lived through his own children's greed and abandonment. He wanted to make sure you had every tool you needed to separate the people who love Maria from the people who love Maria's money. For the first time in 2 years, Maria smiled. Really, truly smiled. When can I come to your office? How about right now? I'll send a car. You shouldn't take the bus to collect an $80 million inheritance. Maria looked around the shelter bathroom, at the cracked mirror, the industrial soap dispenser, the motivational poster about addiction recovery that someone had hung crookedly on the wall. Yesterday, this had been her world. This morning, everything had changed. Mr. Reed? Yes, ma'am. Victor, did he really think I was worth all this? Mrs. Fletcher, his exact words were. Maria Fletcher has the richest heart of anyone I've ever known. She raised 3 children alone and loved them unconditionally, even when they repaid that love with abandonment. It's time her bank account matched her spirit. Maria closed her eyes and felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Not just for money, though God knew the security would be a relief, but for something more valuable. The chance to find out who her children really were. And perhaps more importantly, the chance to remember who she was too. The woman who'd loved unconditionally, sacrificed endlessly, and given everything she had to people who'd decided she wasn't worth their time. Well, Maria thought as she stood up and straightened her shoulders, let's see how they feel about her time now. The black sedan that arrived at the shelter looked like something from another world. Maria watched through the window as other residents gathered to stare at the gleaming vehicle, whispering among themselves about which one of them could possibly warrant such luxury transportation. Grace Fletcher, no relation, despite sharing Maria's surname, approached her with curious eyes. "Mrs. Fletcher? There's a driver outside asking for you." Maria's heart hammered as she gathered her few possessions. A worn canvas bag containing 3 changes of clothes, a small Bible her mother had given her, and a faded photograph of her children from Daniel's high school graduation. Back when they'd still smiled genuinely in her presence, back when being their only parent had been enough. "I'll be back tonight," she told Grace quietly, though she wasn't sure that was true anymore. The driver, a kind-faced man named Thomas Bennett, treated her with the sort of respectful deference she hadn't experienced in years. He opened her door, called her ma'am, and didn't wrinkle his nose at her second-hand clothes or worn shoes. It was such a small thing, but after 2 years of being invisible, being seen and acknowledged felt like a miracle. The law offices of Reed, Caldwell and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of downtown's most prestigious building. Maria had cleaned offices in buildings like this during her years of working 3 jobs, but she'd never ridden in their elevators as anything other than hired help. Harrison Reed was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 50, with silver-touched temples and eyes that seemed genuinely kind. His office was warm and inviting, filled with family photos and comfortable furniture that suggested a man who understood that legal matters were often deeply personal. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, standing to greet her. "It's truly an honor to meet you. Victor spoke of you so often in our final meetings." "He did? Oh yes. You were quite literally his favorite topic of conversation during the last year of his life." Harrison gestured to a chair across from his desk. "May I offer you some coffee? Tea? Anything you'd like." When had anyone last asked what she'd like? The simple courtesy brought tears to her eyes. "Coffee would be wonderful. Thank you." As Harrison's assistant, a warm woman named Eleanor Whitmore brought in a silver tray with actual china cups, Harrison opened a thick file folder. "Before we begin with the legal formalities, I think you should understand exactly what Victor intended with this inheritance. It wasn't just about the money, Mrs. Fletcher. It was about giving you the power to see people's true hearts." He pulled out a sealed envelope marked with her name in Victor's shaky handwriting. "He asked me to give you this personally. It explains his wishes, and his suggestions for how to handle what comes next." Maria's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside, in the careful script of a man whose hands had grown unsteady, but whose mind remained sharp, were 3 pages of the most beautiful words she'd ever read. "My dear Maria, if you're reading this, then Harrison has found you, and you now know that I've left you everything. Please don't feel guilty about this. It brings me more joy than you could possibly imagine to know that my fortune will go to someone who understands the true value of kindness. You gave me something in my final months that my own children never could. The gift of being seen as a human being worthy of love and respect. You held my hand when I cried. You read to me when my eyes failed. You listened to my stories of better days without looking at your watch or checking your phone. You made me feel like I mattered. But more than that, I watched you care for everyone in that place with the same gentle spirit. I saw you comfort Mrs. Patterson when she wet herself and was embarrassed. I watched you patiently feed Mr. Morrison, even when he cursed at you and threw his food. I witnessed your kindness to people who could never repay it, never thank you properly, never even remember your name the next day. That's who you are, Maria. That's the woman who deserves to never worry about money again. Now I know your children. Not personally, but I've lived through my own version of them. Children who only call when they need something. Children who are embarrassed by their parents' circumstances. Children who've convinced themselves that their success somehow absolves them of the debt they owe to the woman who sacrificed everything for them. Especially a woman who raised them completely alone after losing her husband when they were barely more than babies. They will come back to you now. Not because they've suddenly remembered their love, but because they've suddenly remembered their greed. This gives you a gift more precious than money, the gift of truth. You'll finally see who they really are. Harrison will help you if you choose to test them. He's a good man, and he understands that sometimes love needs to be proven rather than simply claimed. Whatever you decide, know this: you are worthy of love. You always have been. The fact that some people were too selfish or blind to see it doesn't diminish your worth by even a fraction. Live beautifully, Maria. You've earned every happiness. With deepest affection and respect, Victor. Maria was openly crying by the time she finished reading. Harrison quietly handed her a tissue box, the expensive kind, she noticed, not the rough paper towels she'd grown accustomed to. He was a remarkable man, Harrison said gently, and he saw a remarkable woman in you. I can't believe this is real. It's very real. And Mrs. Fletcher, I need you to know that Victor's assessment of your children's likely reaction was, well, let's just say he had a keen understanding of human nature. What do you mean? Harrison's expression grew serious. Your son Travis called this morning. Maria's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. Travis called? How did he? Word travels fast in certain circles, Mrs. Fletcher. The probate records became public when the estate was finally settled. Someone at your son's hospital has connections in the legal community. He received a call about an hour ago informing him that his mother had inherited a significant sum from a former employer. What did he say? He wanted to know if I could confirm the amount. When I told him I could only discuss the matter with you directly, he became quite insistent. He mentioned that he was concerned about your ability to manage such a large inheritance, given your recent circumstances. The familiar sting of shame and anger warred in Maria's chest. Even now, even when she'd been given this incredible gift, Travis's first instinct was to assume she was incompetent. He wants to help me manage it, I'm sure. I'm sure he does. Harrison's tone was carefully neutral. Mrs. Fletcher, Victor anticipated this. He prepared a series of, let's call them tests. Ways to reveal people's true motivations before you decide how much, if anything, you want to share with them. What kind of tests? Harrison smiled, the first genuinely amused expression she'd seen from him. Well, for starters, he suggested that you not tell them the actual amount. Not immediately. He recommended telling them you'd inherited some money, perhaps $50,000. Enough to improve your circumstances, but not enough to drastically change theirs. And then you see what they do with that information. Do they celebrate your good fortune? Do they offer to help you invest it wisely? Or do they immediately begin calculating how much of it they can convince you to give them? The brilliant cruelty of it took Maria's breath away. $50,000. Enough to get her off the streets and into a modest apartment, but not enough to make her children wealthy. If they truly loved her, they'd be thrilled at her change of fortune. If they only loved what she could provide. There's more, Harrison continued. Victor suggested that you might want to observe them from a position of, let's call it strategic invisibility. The house in Riverside Heights is 2 streets away from where your son Travis lives. Your daughter Angela's charity work operates out of the community center, just 3 blocks from your new home. You could choose to re-enter their world quietly, see how they treat you when they think you have modest means. And when I'm ready to tell them the truth, that's entirely up to you, Mrs. Fletcher. Victor's will places no restrictions on your inheritance. You can give it all away tomorrow, or you can keep every penny. You can welcome your children back with open arms, or you can decide that some relationships are too broken. Maria stared out the window at the city below, the same city where her children lived their comfortable lives, blissfully unaware that everything was about to change. What would you do? She asked quietly. Harrison was silent for a long moment. I'd want to know, he said finally. I'd want to know if the people who claimed to love me actually did, even if the truth was painful. Maria nodded. She wanted to know too. After 32 years of unconditional love, of being the only parent her children had ever really known, after 2 years of total abandonment, she needed to understand what her children were really made of. How quickly can I move into the house? It's ready now. Fully furnished, fully staffed. Victor wanted to make sure you'd want for nothing. And the $50,000 test? Harrison pulled out his phone. I can call Travis back within the hour and tell him that while I cannot discuss specific amounts, I can confirm that you've inherited what he would consider a modest sum that will allow you to secure housing and basic necessities. Do it, Maria said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. And Mrs. Fletcher? Victor left one more gift for you. Harrison opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small, elegant jewelry box. He wanted you to have something beautiful to wear when you're ready to reclaim your place in the world. Inside the box lay a necklace that took Maria's breath away, a simple strand of pearls with a diamond clasp, elegant and timeless. He said every woman should have pearls, Harrison explained. He said they represent the beautiful things that emerge from life's irritations. As Maria fastened the necklace around her throat, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: power. Not the cruel, grasping power that her children had wielded over her heart, but the quiet power that comes from finally holding all the cards. Her phone rang. Travis's name appeared on the screen. Maria looked at Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. Hello, Travis. Mom. Oh my God, Mom. I just heard the most incredible news. Are you okay? Where are you? I've been so worried about you. Worried about her. For the first time in 2 years, Travis was worried about her. Not embarrassed by her, not ashamed of her, but worried about her. How very interesting. I'm fine, sweetheart. Where did you hear news? A colleague at the hospital has a friend in the legal community. Mom, they're saying you inherited money. Is that true? Are you safe? Are you still at that place? He couldn't even say the word shelter. I'm meeting with the lawyer now, Maria said carefully. It seems a gentleman I cared for at the nursing home left me a small inheritance. How small? The question came too quickly, too eagerly. Maria's heart cracked a little more. Enough to get me back on my feet, she said. Enough for a little apartment somewhere. That's wonderful. Mom, this is such great news. Listen, I know things have been difficult between us lately. I've been thinking we should get together, maybe have dinner. Talk about your future. Make sure you're making smart decisions with this money. Smart decisions. Not let's celebrate your good fortune, or I'm so happy for you. But let's make sure you're making smart decisions. As if she were a child who couldn't be trusted with her own money. As if he had any right to an opinion about her choices after 2 years of pretending she didn't exist. As if he'd forgotten that she was the woman who'd raised him from a baby, alone, working 3 jobs to make sure he never felt the absence of the father he'd barely known. That would be lovely, Travis. I've missed you. I've missed you too, Mom. So much. And hey, maybe we can get Angela and Daniel together too. I know they're going to be thrilled about your good news. Thrilled about her good news. Not thrilled to see her. Not thrilled that she was safe and off the streets. Thrilled about her good news. I'd love to see everyone, Maria said, and meant it. She wanted to see exactly what her children were made of. She wanted to watch them perform their newfound love and concern. She wanted to see how far they'd go to convince her they'd never really abandoned her at all. I'll call them right now and set something up. Mom, I love you. You know that, right? I love you too, Travis. She hung up and looked at Harrison, who had been listening with the expression of a man who'd seen this exact scenario play out many times before. $50,000 is apparently enough to restore their love, Maria observed dryly. It's amazing how therapeutic a little money can be for strained family relationships, Harrison agreed. Though I suspect the treatment loses its effectiveness once they realize how little $50,000 actually buys these days. Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Mom, I just heard the amazing news. Can't wait to see you and celebrate. Love you so much. 3 emoji hearts. 3 heart emojis from a daughter who'd looked at her with disgust 2 nights ago. Then a call from Daniel. Mom, this is incredible. I'm so happy for you. We need to talk about investment strategies. Investment strategies. Not, I'm glad you're safe, or, I'm sorry we haven't been there for you. Investment strategies for money he thought she had. By evening, Maria had received more love and attention from her children than she'd gotten in the past 2 years combined. Suddenly, they all had time for her. Suddenly, they all remembered her phone number. Suddenly, they all wanted to get together and catch up. As she sat in her new bedroom in her new house, 6 bedrooms of space she'd never dreamed of owning, Maria fingered the pearls around her throat and thought about Victor's words. $83 million wasn't just money. It was truth serum. And tomorrow, she would begin to discover exactly what her children were made of. The restaurant Travis chose was expensive but not ostentatious. The kind of place where successful professionals went to be seen by other successful professionals. Maria arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a simple black dress she'd purchased that afternoon with her first withdrawal from Victor's account. Nothing too fancy, nothing that would suggest she had access to more than the modest inheritance they believed she'd received. But she wore the pearls. Victor's pearls caught the light as she moved, and she touched them like a talisman whenever her courage faltered. She watched through the window as her children arrived. Travis first, checking his Rolex and scanning the dining room with the impatient air of someone doing a favor. Angela next, air-kissing the hostess she apparently knew, her designer handbag worth more than most people's monthly rent. Daniel last, already on his phone, gesturing animatedly to someone who was clearly more important than a dinner with his mother. They looked successful. They looked confident. They looked like people who'd never spent a night wondering where their next meal would come from. They looked nothing like the babies she'd rocked to sleep alone, night after night, in the years after Michael died. "Mom!" Angela's voice rang across the restaurant as she spotted Maria. "Oh my God, you look amazing." The embrace that followed was theatrical, all performance, no substance. Angela held her just long enough for other diners to see what a loving daughter she was, but not long enough for Maria to actually feel loved. "Doesn't she look great?" Angela announced to her brothers as they approached. "I told you she'd land on her feet. Mom's always been a survivor." A survivor. As if poverty had been an adventure Maria had chosen rather than a catastrophe her children had allowed to happen. Travis's hug was awkward, obligatory. "You do look good, Mom." Rested. Rested. She'd been sleeping in a homeless shelter, but sure. Rested. Daniel barely looked up from his phone as he offered a one-armed squeeze. "Hey, Mom. Sorry, just finishing up some calls with Singapore. Time zones, you know." They settled into the booth, the same restaurant where, just 4 days ago, Angela had told her she was an embarrassment. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. "So," Travis said, leaning forward with the practiced bedside manner he used on patients' families, "tell us about this inheritance. This must have come as such a shock." "It did," Maria agreed. "Mr. Holloway was such a sweet man. I had no idea he was thinking of me." $50,000 is a good start," Angela said, her tone carefully calibrated to sound supportive rather than disappointed. "You can get a nice little apartment, maybe buy a car. Nothing fancy but reliable. 50,000. Maria almost smiled. Harrison had been right. They'd assumed the smallest amount that could reasonably be called life-changing. "Actually," Maria said carefully, "Mr. Reed said the amount was closer to 75,000. The reaction was instantaneous. Travis's eyes sharpened. Angela's smile became more genuine. Daniel finally looked up from his phone. 75,000? Daniel repeated. "Mom, that's incredible. Do you have any idea what you want to do with it?" "Well," Maria said, playing her role perfectly, "Mr. Reed suggested I should be careful. He said people might try to take advantage of me, give me bad advice about investments, or ask me to loan them money." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, other families continued their conversations, but at their table, 3 successful adults suddenly looked like children who'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. That's good advice," Travis said finally. "You definitely want to be careful. But family's different, of course. We'd never steer you wrong." "Of course not," Angela agreed quickly. "We just want what's best for you." "Speaking of which," Daniel said, sliding his phone into his pocket for the first time all evening, "I've been thinking about your situation, and I have some ideas." Here it comes, Maria thought. "You know I work in tech consulting, right? Well, I've got connections with some really solid investment firms. Low risk, steady returns. Nothing flashy, but your money could be working for you instead of just sitting in a savings account." "That's thoughtful of you, Daniel. And honestly, Mom, 75,000 isn't as much as it sounds like these days. Inflation, taxes, the cost of living. You need to be smart about this." Travis nodded sagely. Daniel's right. And speaking of being smart, have you thought about where you want to live? Because I was thinking, my neighborhood has some really nice senior communities. Assisted living places with activities and medical care on site. Assisted living. Maria was 66 and in perfect health, but Travis was already trying to warehouse her somewhere convenient. The thing is, Travis continued, places like that require a significant upfront payment, usually around 60 or 70,000 for a good facility. But it would give you security, Mom. Peace of mind. Peace of mind. And conveniently, it would also place her entire inheritance directly into the hands of an institution, leaving nothing for her to potentially waste or, God forbid, spend on herself. That sounds expensive, Maria said carefully. It is, Angela chimed in, but it's an investment in your future. And honestly, Mom, at your age, living alone isn't really practical anymore. At her age, Maria had raised 3 children alone from the time they were babies while working 3 jobs. She'd managed budgets, negotiated with landlords, navigated the healthcare system, and somehow turned toddlers into successful adults. But at 66, she was apparently too feeble to live independently. Plus, Angela continued, once you're settled somewhere nice, we could visit more often. The kids could come see Grandma, maybe spend weekends. The kids. Maria's grandchildren, who'd been kept away from her during her poverty, but would apparently be allowed to visit once she'd been safely contained in an institution. Children she'd never been allowed to meet because Travis was ashamed of his mother. I appreciate you all looking out for me, Maria said. But I was actually thinking about getting a small house. Maybe something in a nice neighborhood where I could have a garden. The look that passed between her children was subtle but unmistakable. It was the look of people realizing their carefully laid plans were being threatened. Mom, Travis said in his most patient voice, I don't think you understand how expensive houses are these days. Even in less desirable areas, you're looking at $300,000-400,000. Your inheritance wouldn't even cover a down payment. Unless, Daniel said slowly, you were thinking of asking for help with the mortgage? Because honestly, Mom, that might not be the best idea. Property taxes, maintenance, insurance, it adds up fast. Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach. I wasn't planning to ask you for money, Daniel. Of course not, he said quickly. I just meant, if you were thinking about it, well, things are pretty tight for all of us right now. Things were tight. Daniel drove a Tesla and lived in a house worth $800,000, but things were tight. My practice has been slow lately, Travis added. Medical billing is a nightmare, and with Sarah's student loans and the kids' expenses. Sarah, the wife Maria had never been allowed to meet. And the children, Travis's stepchildren from Sarah's first marriage, who'd never been allowed to know they had a step-grandmother. And Edward's been working toward that partnership, Angela said. We've had to make some significant financial commitments to the right social organizations, if you know what I mean. Maria knew exactly what she meant. They were all doing well, but not well enough. They all had more than Maria had ever dreamed of, but it wasn't enough for them. And now, faced with her modest windfall, their first instinct wasn't to celebrate her good fortune. It was to figure out how to access it. There is one other option, Angela said, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone broaching a delicate subject. You could always come stay with one of us. Temporarily, while you figure things out. Really? Maria's heart leaped despite everything. Could it be that simple? Could her children actually want her back? Well, Angela continued, Edward and I have that guest room above the garage. It's small but cozy. You'd have your own entrance, your own bathroom. Very private. Above the garage. Like a servant's quarters. And you could help out around the house, Angela continued, warming to her theme. Light cleaning, maybe help with dinner when I have to work late on charity events. The kids would love having Grandma around. There it was. They didn't want her back as their mother. They wanted her back as free domestic help who came with a $75,000 signing bonus. That's generous of you, Angela. We're family, Angela said, reaching across the table to pat Maria's hand. We take care of each other. Maria looked around the table at these 3 people she'd created, fed, clothed, educated, and loved with every fiber of her being. She'd been their only parent since they were babies. their only constant in a world that had taken their father away before they were old enough to remember him. They sat there in their expensive clothes, eating their $40 entrees, planning how to divvy up the modest inheritance that would finally get their embarrassing mother off the streets. And not one of them, not one, had asked if she was okay. Not one had apologized for the 2 years of silence. Not one had acknowledged that they'd abandoned the only parent they'd ever really known when she needed them most. Instead, they'd crafted a perfect plan. Park her in assisted living or above Angela's garage, use her money to pay for it, and extract free labor in exchange for the privilege of being housed by her own children. "I need to ask you something," Maria said quietly. The table fell silent. 2 years ago, when I lost my job, when I lost my house, when I called each of you for help. Do you remember what you told me? Travis shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we've been through this. Do you remember?" Maria's voice was stronger now. Angela's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. "We were in different places then. Our circumstances were different." "Your circumstances," Maria repeated. "Travis, you were already a successful doctor. Angela, you were married to a lawyer and living in a $500,000 house. Daniel, your tech company was thriving. What circumstances were different?" "It's not that simple, Mom," Daniel said. "We had obligations, responsibilities. To everyone except me." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Look," Travis said finally, "maybe we could have handled things better back then. But we're here now. We want to help." "You want to help now," Maria said. "Now, when you think I have $75,000. "That's not fair," Angela protested. "We love you. We've always loved you." "Have you?" Maria asked. "Because 4 days ago, in this very restaurant, you told me I was an embarrassment. You said I couldn't come to your charity gala because I might reflect poorly on Edward's career." Angela's face went white. "You're taking that out of context." "Am I?" "Travis, when I called to tell you I was sleeping in my car, you told me you couldn't afford to help because you just bought Sarah a new SUV for the kids. Daniel, when I asked if I could stay on your couch for a few days while I looked for work, you said your girlfriend wouldn't be comfortable with that." Her children stared at her as if she'd become a stranger. "But now," Maria continued, "now that you think I have money, suddenly you have room for me. Above the garage, where I can earn my keep by cleaning your house and watching children I've never been allowed to meet." "Mom," Travis said desperately, "you're misunderstanding." "Am I?" Maria stood up, her hand instinctively going to the pearls at her throat. "Or am I finally understanding perfectly?" She looked at each of them in turn. These 3 people who'd once been her world, who'd once depended on her for everything, who'd once loved her simply because she was the only parent they had. "I think," she said quietly, "I need to consider all my options very carefully." "What does that mean?" Daniel asked. "It means I'm going to take Mr. Reed's advice. I'm going to be very careful about who I trust with my future." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth," she said, "I would have given you anything. All of it. Every penny. If you just asked me to stay because you loved me, instead of because you wanted to manage my money." "Mom, wait," Angela called out. But Maria was already walking away, past the other families enjoying their dinners, past the life she'd once dreamed of having with her children, toward the door and the rest of her life. As she stepped into the cool evening air, her phone buzzed with frantic texts. "Travis, Mom, please call me. I think there was a misunderstanding. Angela, don't make any big decisions without talking to us first. We love you. Daniel, let's have coffee tomorrow and discuss this rationally." Maria deleted the messages without reading them completely. She'd heard enough rationality for one evening. Tomorrow, she decided, it was time for her children to learn exactly what their mother was worth, and exactly what their love had cost them. The campaign began at dawn. Maria woke in her beautiful new bedroom to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Her children, it seemed, had spent the night strategizing, and their approach was nothing if not thorough. The text started sweet. "Travis, Mom, I love you so much. I'm sorry if I said anything that hurt you. Can we please talk? Angela, you're everything to me, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you. Please don't shut us out. Daniel, I was an idiot last night. You're the most important person in my life. Let me make it right. But as the hours passed and Maria didn't respond, the messages grew more desperate. Travis, Mom, I'm worried about you. Are you making decisions based on emotion rather than logic? Angela, please don't let some lawyer convince you that your family doesn't love you. We've always loved you. Daniel, I hope you're not being influenced by people who don't have your best interests at heart. By noon, the gloves had come off entirely. Travis, I've been talking to some colleagues about elderly financial abuse. There are legal protections if someone is being manipulated. Angela, Edward thinks we should have a family meeting with your lawyer present. There might be undue influence happening here. Daniel, I'm concerned about your mental state, Mom. Sudden windfalls can be overwhelming for people your age. Maria stared at her phone in disbelief. In less than 12 hours, her children had gone from loving concern to barely veiled threats. They were talking about having her declared mentally incompetent, about legal intervention, about protection from the very inheritance that was rightfully hers. But they still thought she only had $75,000. The doorbell rang. Through her new home's elegant front window, Maria could see Travis pacing on her porch, his face tight with frustration. Behind him sat his BMW, engine running, as if he planned to make this visit quick and decisive. She didn't answer. Mom, he called through the door. I know you're in there. We need to talk. She watched him from behind her curtains, this man she'd raised alone from the time he was barely 3 years old, whose fever she'd monitored through countless nights, whose dreams she'd nurtured with every sacrifice she could make. He looked like a stranger now, aggressive, entitled, desperate. He pounded on the door harder. Mom, open up. This is ridiculous. You can't just ignore your family. But she could. And she did. Travis finally left, but not before leaving a business card wedged in her door frame. Maria recognized the name. Dr. Patricia Winslow, geriatric psychiatry. Her son, her firstborn, the child she'd nearly died bringing into this world, was already shopping for a psychiatrist to declare her incompetent. The second wave came from Angela. At 3 p.m., a black sedan pulled up to Maria's house. Angela stepped out, followed by two people Maria had never seen before. A tall man in an expensive suit who must be Edward, and a woman with a briefcase who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Angela didn't knock. She used the spare key from under the flower pot, a hiding place Maria had mentioned during their dinner conversation when discussing home security. Mom, Angela's voice echoed through the house. It's me, sweetheart. I brought Edward, and we have someone who can help us sort all this out. Maria emerged from the kitchen, where she'd been making tea and trying to process the fact that her daughter had just broken into her home. Angela, I didn't invite you in. Oh, Mom. Angela's smile was brittle, desperate. We're family. We don't need invitations. Edward stepped forward, extending his hand with the practiced charm of a man accustomed to winning people over. Mrs. Fletcher, I'm Edward Whitmore. I've heard so much about you. Have you? Maria shook his hand briefly. That's interesting, considering we've never met despite being family for 8 years. Edward's smile faltered slightly. Well, yes, our schedules have been, but that's why we're here now. Angela tells me you've come into some money, and we want to make sure you're protected. The woman with the briefcase stepped forward. Mrs. Fletcher, I'm Jennifer Caldwell, estate planning attorney. Your daughter is concerned that you might not have proper legal representation during this transition. Jennifer Caldwell, the same last name as Harrison's firm. Maria wondered if this was coincidence, or if her children were actively trying to undermine her relationship with her own lawyer. I have a lawyer, Maria said carefully. Of course you do, Angela said quickly. But Mom, this Harrison Reed person, we looked him up. He specializes in probate, not financial planning. You need someone who understands complex estate management. Complex estate management. For $75,000. We're here because we love you, Edward said, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he probably used in court. And because we're concerned that you might be making decisions without fully understanding the implications. What implications? Jennifer opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Well, for instance, tax implications. Inheritance tax, gift tax if you decide to share with family members, investment tax. It can be quite overwhelming. That's why we think you should consider establishing a family trust, Angela added. with trustees who can help manage everything for you. Trustees. Maria had no doubt who Angela thought should serve in that role. A family trust would protect your assets, Edward continued, and ensure that your money is used wisely for your long-term care needs. It would also, Jennifer added with what was probably meant to be a reassuring smile, protect you from potential financial abuse by outsiders who might try to take advantage of your situation. The irony was breathtaking. They were warning her about financial abuse while actively attempting to convince her to sign her inheritance over to them. I appreciate your concern, Maria said, but I'm not ready to make any major decisions. Angela's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the desperation underneath. Mom, you can't just sit on this money. Inflation, market volatility. Every day you wait, you're losing value. I've had the inheritance for exactly 4 days, Angela. But in today's economy, Maria interrupted, I think I can afford to take my time making decisions about my own money. Edward exchanged a look with Angela, the kind of look that passed between co-conspirators when their mark wasn't cooperating. Mrs. Fletcher, Edward said, his tone shifting to something harder, more professional. I hope you understand that your children are genuinely concerned about your welfare. They've told me about your recent difficulties. Homelessness, financial instability. These experiences can affect judgment, make people overly suspicious or defensive. Are you suggesting I'm mentally impaired, Edward? Of course not, he said quickly. But trauma can impact decision-making. That's why it's so important to have trusted advisors, family members, involved in major financial decisions. Maria looked at these 3 people standing in her living room, her daughter, her daughter's husband, and a lawyer they'd brought to convince her to sign away her financial independence, and felt something harden inside her chest. I think you should leave now. Mom, Angela started. I think you should leave. All of you. We're just trying to help, Jennifer said. By having me declared incompetent? By convincing me to put my money in a trust controlled by people who wouldn't help me when I was sleeping in my car. Angela's composure finally cracked completely. That's not fair. We couldn't just. You can't expect us to solve all your problems. I didn't expect you to solve my problems, Angela. I expected you, my only daughter, who I raised alone from the time you were 18 months old, not to abandon me completely. We never abandoned you. Really? When's the last time you called me before you found out about the inheritance? The silence was damning. When's the last time you invited me for dinner? Asked about my health? Introduced me to your children as their grandmother instead of hiding me like some shameful secret? That's not. When's the last time you treated me like a person instead of a problem to be managed or an asset to be protected? Edward stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Now listen here. No, Maria said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised all of them. You listen. This is my house, my money, and my decision. And I'm deciding that I want you to leave. Mom, please, Angela's voice broke. Don't do this. Don't shut us out. We're your family. Are you? Maria asked quietly. Because family doesn't break into each other's homes. Family doesn't threaten psychiatric evaluations when they don't get their way. And family doesn't love conditionally based on bank account balances. Angela was crying now. Real tears, Maria thought, though whether they were from genuine emotion or from seeing $75,000 slip through her fingers was impossible to tell. We do love you, Angela whispered. We've always loved you. Then prove it, Maria said. Leave me alone for a week. Don't call, don't text, don't show up at my door with lawyers and trustees and interventions. If you love me, trust me to make my own decisions about my own life. A week? Edward asked. That's not reasonable. A week, Maria repeated. If your love is real, it should still be there in 7 days. She walked to the front door and held it open. After a long moment, Jennifer packed up her briefcase. Edward straightened his tie and walked out with the stiff dignity of a man who'd been outmaneuvered. Angela lingered, her makeup ruined by tears. Mom, she whispered, I really do love you. I hope so, sweetheart, Maria said gently. Because if you don't, if this is all about money, you're about to be very, very disappointed. After they left, Maria sat in her empty house and felt the walls closing in. Her children were circling like sharks now, desperate and dangerous. They'd tried love, then pressure, then legal intimidation. What would they try next? Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Mom, I heard about Angela's visit. That was out of line. Can I come by tonight? Just me, just to talk." Maria stared at the message. Daniel, her baby, the one she'd thought might be different. Was he genuinely concerned, or was this just a new tactic? Good cop to his siblings' bad cop routine? She was so tired of not knowing. So tired of analyzing every word, every gesture, looking for the love that used to be freely given and freely received. For the first time since receiving Victor's inheritance, Maria wondered if the money was worth the heartbreak of discovering who her children really were. But there was no going back now. The truth, once unleashed, couldn't be contained. She had a feeling things were about to get much worse before they got better. Maria's breaking point came the next Tuesday morning when she found Travis sitting in his car outside her house. Not parked, not visiting, just sitting there, watching her home like a detective on surveillance. When she opened her front door to retrieve the newspaper, he was on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone she couldn't see. He'd been there since dawn. By Wednesday, Angela had driven past her house 6 times. Maria counted, because each time, Angela slowed down, craned her neck to peer at the windows, and made phone calls as she drove away. By Thursday, Daniel had started showing up at the coffee shop 3 blocks from her house, positioning himself where he could see everyone who came and went from her neighborhood. Her children, the 3 people she'd loved more than her own life, the babies she'd raised alone after losing Michael when they were barely more than toddlers, were stalking her. That evening, as Maria sat in her living room watching her son's BMW make its 4th pass of the day, she realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. They weren't going to stop. They'd tasted the possibility of money, and like addicts, they would do whatever it took to get their fix. Even if it meant destroying the woman who'd been their entire world growing up. She picked up her phone and called Harrison Reed. "I'm ready," she said when he answered. "I want to tell them the truth. All of it. All of it. And Harrison, I want them to understand exactly what they've lost." The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at Harrison's office. Maria insisted on neutral ground. She would no longer allow her children into her home uninvited, and she didn't trust them not to try something desperate in a private setting. She arrived 30 minutes early, wearing a navy blue suit she'd purchased that morning in Victor's Pearls. She looked, Harrison observed approvingly, like exactly what she was. A woman of considerable means who would not be intimidated or manipulated. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as they waited. "Once they know the real amount, everything changes. They'll either be genuinely remorseful or they'll become even more dangerous," Maria finished. "I know. But Harrison, I can't live like this. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if every gesture of love is really a calculation about money. I need to know who they are. And if the answer breaks your heart?" Maria touched the pearls at her throat. Victor's reminder that beautiful things could emerge from life's most painful irritations. "Then at least I'll know the truth. And I can decide what to do with it." Travis arrived first, precisely on time, his face drawn with the exhaustion of someone who'd spent a week plotting and scheming. He'd brought someone with him, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and nervous energy. "Mom," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "this is my wife, Sarah." Sarah, the woman Maria had never met despite 8 years of marriage to her eldest son. The woman whose student loans were apparently more important than helping her mother-in-law avoid homelessness. The woman whose children from her first marriage had been kept from ever knowing they had a step-grandmother. "Mrs. Fletcher," Sarah said, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you." "Have you?" Maria wondered. "What exactly has my son told you about the woman who raised him alone from the time he was barely 3 years old?" Angela arrived next, with Edward in tow and her makeup perfectly applied to hide the stress lines that had appeared around her eyes. She kissed Maria's cheek, a gesture that would have meant everything a week ago and now felt like a performance. Daniel was last, as always, but for once he wasn't on his phone. He looked genuinely nervous, like a man who'd finally realized the stakes of the game he'd been playing. Harrison took his place behind his desk, a thick folder before him, and gestured for everyone to sit. The office fell silent except for the tick of an antique clock and the distant sounds of traffic far below. Thank you all for coming, Harrison began. Mrs. Fletcher has asked me to clarify some details about her inheritance, as there seems to be some confusion about the nature and extent of Mr. Holloway's bequest. Travis leaned forward. We appreciate you meeting with us, Mr. Reed. As Maria's family, we're concerned that she might not fully understand the complexities of managing even a modest inheritance. Modest, Harrison repeated, his tone carefully neutral. That's an interesting word choice, Dr. Fletcher. Well, Angela said, $75,000 is wonderful, of course, but it's not exactly life-changing money. Not in today's economy. Mom needs guidance, Daniel added. Professional advice about taxes, investments, long-term care planning. We're just trying to make sure she's protected. Protected, Harrison echoed. From what exactly? From people who might try to take advantage of her, Edward said, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. Elderly individuals with sudden windfalls are often targeted by financial predators. Maria watched this performance with growing amazement. Even here, in a lawyer's office, after a week of surveillance and threats and attempted legal intervention, they were still pretending their concern was for her welfare. These were the babies she'd fed in the middle of the night, alone, while their friends' fathers helped with night feedings. The toddlers she'd comforted through nightmares when there was no husband to share the burden. The children she'd worked 3 jobs to support, sacrificing her own dreams so they could have theirs. And they were talking about her like she was incompetent. I see, Harrison said. And you believe that $75,000 would attract such predators? Any amount of money can be dangerous in the wrong hands, Travis said firmly. That's why we think a family trust would be the most responsible approach. Harrison opened his folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Before we discuss trusts and management strategies, I think it's important that everyone understand exactly what we're managing. He handed the paper to Travis. This is the final accounting of Victor Holloway's estate as distributed to Mrs. Fletcher. Travis looked at the paper. His face went white. The document fluttered from his suddenly nerveless fingers. What is it? Angela asked, reaching for the paper. She read it. Her mouth opened in a perfect O of shock. Daniel grabbed the paper from his sister's hands. This can't be right. What does it say? Sarah asked, the only person in the room besides Maria and Harrison who didn't look like she'd seen a ghost. $83 million, Daniel whispered. $200,000. The office fell silent. There must be a mistake, Travis said finally. Some kind of clerical error. There's no mistake, Harrison said calmly. Mrs. Fletcher is the sole beneficiary of an estate worth approximately $83 million, plus real estate, plus various investment accounts that continue to generate substantial income. Angela was staring at her mother as if she'd never seen her before. You've had $83 million this entire time? I've had it for exactly 1 week, Maria said quietly. The same week that you've been following me, threatening me with psychiatric evaluation, and trying to have me declared incompetent to manage my own affairs. But you said 75,000, Travis stammered. No, Travis. You said 75,000. You assumed that was the amount, and I let you believe it because I wanted to see what you would do with that information. This changes everything, Edward breathed. Does it? Maria asked. How exactly does it change anything? Well, obviously. Obviously what, Edward? Obviously you'll treat me with more respect now? Obviously Angela will want to introduce me to her children? Obviously Travis will stop hiding me from his wife and her children. Sarah looked stricken. Travis, you haven't, she's never met Emma and Michael? Travis couldn't meet his wife's eyes. The amount of money I have doesn't change who I am, Maria continued. It doesn't change the fact that I spent 2 years homeless while my children lived in comfort. It doesn't change the fact that you all abandoned the only parent you'd ever really known when I needed you most. Mom, Angela started. It doesn't change the fact that the only reason you're all here now is because you want something from me. The only thing that's changed is how much you think you can get. Daniel found his voice. That's not fair. We love you. Do you, Daniel? Because a week ago, you were researching financial advisors to manage my $75,000. What services are you planning to offer now that you know it's $83 million? The look that crossed Daniel's face told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't thinking about her welfare or their relationship. He was calculating percentages. This is a family matter, Edward said, apparently deciding that attack was the best defense. Mr. Reed, I don't think it's appropriate for you to be present during private family discussions about estate planning. Edward, Maria said, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the room look at her differently. Mr. Reed works for me. He stays. But surely you want to discuss this with your children privately. I've heard everything I need to hear from my children. For the past week, in fact. Travis was shaking his head as if he could somehow undo the revelation. Mom, if you'd just told us the truth from the beginning, what would you have done differently, Travis? Would you have loved me more? Would you have treated me with more respect? Would you have apologized for the 2 years you pretended the woman who raised you single-handedly didn't exist? We would have. He stopped, because they all knew the answer. They would have been even more manipulative, even more aggressive, even more determined to control her and her money. Here's what's going to happen, Maria said, standing up. I'm going to leave now. I'm going to go home to my beautiful house that I can afford because a stranger, a dying old man with no family who cared about him, saw something in me that my own children never did. She picked up her purse and walked toward the door. I'm going to think very carefully about what the past week has taught me about all of you. And then I'm going to decide what role, if any, you'll have in the rest of my life. Mom, wait, Angela called out. We can fix this. We can make this right. Maria paused at the door. Can you? Can you unabandon me? Can you unthreaten me? Can you unstalk me? We made mistakes, Travis said desperately. But we're family. We can work through this. Family, Maria repeated. Travis, you brought a psychiatrist's business card to my house. Angela, you broke into my home with a lawyer. Daniel, you've been conducting surveillance on me like I'm a criminal. She looked at each of them in turn. These 3 people who'd once been her whole world, who'd once clung to her legs during thunderstorms because she was the only parent they had, who'd once promised to take care of her when she got old. I raised you to be better than this, she said quietly. I was your mother and your father both. I sacrificed everything, worked 3 jobs, sold everything I owned, gave up my dreams, gave up any chance of remarrying, to give you the tools to be decent human beings. And you've used those tools to try to rob and manipulate and control the woman who was your entire world. The tears came then, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of grief for the children who no longer existed, who'd been replaced by these grasping strangers. For what you thought was $75,000, you were willing to have me committed. You were willing to steal my agency, my dignity, my freedom. She opened the door. I wonder what you'll be willing to do now that you know how much money is actually at stake. As she walked out, she heard Travis calling her name, heard Angela sobbing, heard Daniel frantically whispering to Edward about legal options and inheritance law. But for the first time in a week, Maria felt something like peace. The truth was ugly, but it was clean. And now she knew exactly who her children were. The only question left was what she was going to do about it. For days after the revelation at Harrison's office, they came for her at midnight. Not with violence or drama, but with something far more insidious. A coordinated legal assault designed to strip away everything Victor Holloway had given her. Maria woke to the sound of her doorbell ringing insistently, followed by loud knocking. Through her bedroom window, she could see 3 cars in her driveway. Travis's BMW, Angela's Mercedes, and a black sedan she didn't recognize. She pulled on her robe and walked downstairs, her heart hammering but her resolve steady. She'd been expecting this ever since she'd walked out of that lawyer's office, leaving her children to process the magnitude of what they'd lost through their own greed. Mom, Angela called through the door. Please open up. We have some papers you need to see. Legal documents, Travis added, his voice tight with desperation. From the court. Maria opened the door, but left the chain latch engaged. Through the gap, she could see her 3 children flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, lawyers undoubtedly. Their faces bore the haggard look of people who'd spent days plotting in desperation. It's midnight, she said calmly. This couldn't wait, Daniel said, his face flushed with a manic energy she'd never seen before. Mom, we found a way to protect you. From what? Edward stepped forward, holding a thick folder with trembling hands. His usual composure had cracked completely. Mrs. Fletcher, we've petitioned the court for an emergency conservatorship hearing. Given your recent erratic behavior and the substantial sum involved, we're concerned about your capacity to make sound financial decisions. There it was, the nuclear option. After learning she had $83 million instead of $75,000, they were trying to have her declared legally incompetent so they could control her inheritance directly. Erratic behavior, Maria repeated, almost amused. Refusing to accept help from family members, Travis explained, his medical authority voice wavering with barely controlled hysteria. Isolating yourself, making impulsive decisions without consultation, displaying paranoid thoughts about people who care about you. The court takes elder financial abuse very seriously, added one of the lawyers, a sharp-faced woman whose eyes held the gleam of someone who smelled a large payday. Even when that abuse is self-inflicted, Maria looked at these 5 people standing on her porch at midnight, 3 of whom she'd carried in her womb and raised alone from infancy, trying to convince her that stealing her autonomy was actually protecting her. The irony was staggering. "I'm not opening this door," she said. "Mom, be reasonable," Angela started, her voice breaking. "The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning," the other lawyer interrupted. "You'll need proper representation. We've taken the liberty of arranging." "I have representation," Maria said firmly. "Harrison Reed." Edward's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Mr. Reed specializes in probate, not competency hearings. This is a complex area of elder law that requires specialized expertise. Do you really think he can handle $83 million worth of legal complexity?" "We've arranged for Margaret Prescott to represent you," the female lawyer added. "She's experienced in these matters and understands what's best for seniors in your situation." Margaret Prescott, another lawyer chosen by her children, paid by her children, whose loyalty would be to her children. "How thoughtful of you to arrange my defense against your own accusations," Maria observed. "This isn't an attack," Travis said, but his voice cracked on the words. "We're trying to protect you from people who might manipulate you, take advantage of your vulnerability, convince you to make decisions that aren't in your best interest." "People like Harrison Reed?" Maria asked. "People like anyone who tells you what you want to hear instead of what you need to hear," Angela said through her tears. "Mom, $83 million is more money than any of us can truly comprehend. You've never managed anything close to that kind of wealth. One wrong decision could cost you millions." "I could lose everything," Maria repeated slowly. "To whom exactly?" "Con artists, fake investment schemes, charity scams," Daniel rattled off. "Wealthy elderly individuals are targeted constantly. There are entire criminal organizations built around finding people like you. And your solution is to make sure I can't access my own money without your permission." "Supervised access," Edward corrected, some of his lawyer composure returning. "With proper oversight to ensure your assets are protected and managed responsibly by people who love you." Maria felt something cold and final settle in her chest as she looked through the gap at these people. Her children, whom she'd sacrificed everything to raise alone after their father died when they were barely more than babies. "I'm closing the door now," she said. "Mom, you have to listen to us," Travis shouted as she began to shut it. "If you don't cooperate, if you make us go to court, this will become public record. Everyone will know about your situation, your homelessness, your mental state. It'll all come out." The threat hung in the air like poison. Submit to their control, or they'd humiliate her publicly by having her declared mentally incompetent in open court. Maria paused, her hand on the door. "You know what, Travis? Let's do exactly that. Let's go to court. Let's make this public record." "What?" Angela's voice was a strangled whisper. "I said let's go to court. Monday morning. And I'll tell the judge, and anyone else who cares to listen, exactly why my children think the woman who raised them single-handedly from infancy is incompetent to manage her own money." She could see the panic flooding their faces through the crack in the door. "I'll tell them about the 2 years I spent homeless while my successful children, the ones I raised alone after their father died when they were babies, lived in million-dollar homes. I'll tell them about the restaurant where you called me an embarrassment. I'll tell them about the surveillance, the break-ins, the psychiatric evaluations you tried to arrange without my consent." "Mom, please," Daniel started. "I'll tell them about the lawyers you hired to convince me to sign away my rights, the trusts you wanted to establish with yourselves as trustees, the assisted living facilities you researched to warehouse the woman who was your entire world growing up. You're being emotional, Edward said desperately. The court will see that you're not thinking clearly. Am I not? Maria smiled, an expression that must have terrified them because they all took a step back. Edward, I think the court will be very interested to hear why three wealthy, successful adults decided their elderly mother was mentally incompetent exactly 1 week after discovering she'd inherited $83 million instead of the $75,000 they'd been planning to control. The silence was deafening. I think, Maria continued, they'll want to know why children who couldn't spare a phone call when I was sleeping in my car suddenly became so concerned about my welfare once they learned the true size of my inheritance. It's not like that, Angela whispered, but her voice held no conviction. Isn't it? Then explain to me, Angela. Explain to the court. Why you tried to have me committed when you thought I had a modest inheritance, but you want to manage my assets now that you know I'm worth more than all of your net worths combined. She could see them exchanging panicked glances, the lawyers shifting uncomfortably. Here's what's going to happen, Maria said, her voice carrying the unshakable authority of a woman who'd finally remembered her true worth. You're going to withdraw your petition. You're going to apologize to Mr. Reed for questioning his competence. And you're going to leave me alone. We can't do that, Travis said weakly. Then we'll see you in court. And Travis, I hope you're prepared to explain to the judge, and to your wife, and to your colleagues, and to anyone else who reads the court records, exactly what kind of son abandons his mother to homelessness and then tries to steal her inheritance. Sarah, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Is that true? Travis, did you really let your mother live homeless while we had that extra guest room sitting empty? The crack in their united front was small but significant. Sarah, this isn't the time, Travis began. Did you let your mother, the woman who raised you alone from the time you were 3 years old, sleep on the streets while we were debating whether to renovate the kitchen or the bathroom? Travis's silence was answer enough. Oh my God, Sarah breathed. Travis, how could you? She's not just your mother. She's the only parent you ever really knew. You don't understand the complexities. I understand that you let an elderly woman sleep in her car while you bought me jewelry for our anniversary. Maria watched this confrontation with fascination. Sarah, the wife she'd never been allowed to meet, was the first person in weeks to express genuine horror at her children's behavior. Mrs. Fletcher, Sarah said, turning to address her directly, I had no idea. Travis told me you were. He said you preferred to be independent, that you didn't want help. Preferred to be homeless? Maria asked gently. Sarah's face crumpled. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. If I had known that the woman who raised my husband when he had no one else was living on the streets, I would have driven to that shelter myself and brought you home. For the first time in weeks, Maria felt a flicker of hope. Not hope that her children would change. That ship had long since sailed, but hope that perhaps not everyone in their extended family was irredeemably selfish. Thank you, Sarah, she said quietly. That means more to me than you know. This is all very touching, the female lawyer interrupted, but it doesn't change the legal reality. Mrs. Fletcher, you need professional guidance in managing this inheritance, and your children have a legal right to petition for protective measures. Actually, came a familiar voice from behind them, they don't. Everyone turned to see Harrison Reed walking up the driveway, flanked by 2 other men in suits. Despite the midnight hour, he looked calm, professional, and utterly unintimidated by the crowd on Maria's porch. Mr. Reed, Travis said, his voice tight with forced courtesy. This is rather late for a house call. Emergency situations require emergency responses, Harrison replied smoothly. Especially when clients are being threatened with frivolous legal action designed to circumvent their legal rights. He handed a thick folder to the female lawyer. Motion to dismiss with prejudice. Supported by expert psychiatric evaluation, financial competency assessment, and extensive documentation of the petitioner's own behavior over the past 2 weeks. You can't have prepared all this in 4 days, Edward protested. Actually, I've been preparing it for 2 weeks, Harrison said calmly. Ever since Mrs. Fletcher first expressed concern that her inheritance might attract fortune hunters, including family members. He turned to Maria with a slight smile. Mrs. Fletcher, Dr. Patricia Winslow, the geriatric psychiatrist your son researched, has conducted a thorough evaluation of your mental competency at my request. I think you'll find her conclusions illuminating. Maria took the report he handed her and read the summary aloud. Patient demonstrates superior cognitive function, excellent financial judgment, and entirely appropriate caution regarding potential exploitation. Patient's wariness of family members' motivations appears fully justified given documented pattern of abandonment, manipulation, and attempted financial coercion. Patient shows remarkable resilience and sound decision-making despite prolonged trauma inflicted by family members. The silence that followed was thunderous. Furthermore, Harrison continued, I should mention that Mrs. Fletcher's inheritance includes certain protections that Mr. Holloway built into his will specifically to guard against family members who might attempt exactly this kind of legal action. What kind of protections? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harrison's smile was sharp as winter moonlight. The kind that make attempted inheritance theft a very expensive proposition for anyone foolish enough to try it. The kind that ensure anyone who attempts to manipulate or coerce Mrs. Fletcher forfeits any possibility of ever benefiting from her generosity. Travis was staring at the dismissal papers as if they were written in a language he'd never seen before. This can't be legal. It's entirely legal. Just as it was entirely legal for Mr. Holloway to include specific provisions in his will regarding what should happen to family members who attempt to steal from his chosen beneficiary. What provisions? Angela asked, her voice cracking. I think, Harrison said, that's a conversation for another time. If there is another time. He turned to the two lawyers Maria's children had brought. I trust you'll be withdrawing your petition first thing Monday morning? Because I'd hate to have to file countersuits for harassment, elder abuse, attempted theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The lawyers looked at each other, then at their clients, then apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. We'll be in touch, the female lawyer said curtly, then walked quickly back to her car. Wait, Edward called after them. What about our retainer? But the lawyers were already driving away, leaving Maria's children standing on her porch like the abandoned children they'd once been, except now they'd abandoned themselves. This isn't over, Edward said, but his voice carried no conviction. Yes, it is, Maria said firmly. It's over, Edward. All of it. The plotting, the scheming, the legal threats, it's done. She looked at each of her children in turn. These three people she'd created and nurtured and sacrificed everything for, who'd repaid that sacrifice with abandonment and greed. You have a choice now, Maria continued. You can accept that I am a competent adult woman capable of making my own decisions about my own money and my own life. Or you can continue down this path and discover what Victor Holloway really thought of children who abandon and then try to rob their parents. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Go home, Maria said, exhaustion finally creeping into her voice. All of you, think about who you want to be, the children I raised, or the strangers you've become. She stepped back and began to close the door. Mom, Angela called out desperately. What do we have to do? How do we fix this? Maria paused, her hand on the doorknob, looking at these three people who'd once been her entire world. I don't know if you can, sweetheart. But if you want to try, it starts with remembering that I'm your mother, the only parent you ever really knew, not your lottery ticket. She closed the door and locked it, leaving her children standing in the darkness with the wreckage of their greed and the faintest glimmer of hope for redemption. Through her window, she watched them argue among themselves before finally driving away. Sarah was the last to leave, and Maria could see her wiping tears from her eyes as she climbed into Travis's car. At least one person in her family still remembered what love looked like. Whether the others could find their way back to it remained to be seen. 6 months after that midnight confrontation, Maria Fletcher stood in her garden, watching her 5-year-old step-granddaughter Emma chase butterflies among the rose bushes Victor's gardener had planted. The little girl's laughter rang like bells across the perfectly manicured lawn, a sound Maria had never thought she'd hear in her own home. Grandma Maria, Emma called out, running toward her with dirt-streaked hands and grass stains on her dress. Look what I found. She held up a perfectly formed chrysalis hanging from a small branch. Sarah says there's a butterfly inside, waiting to come out. That's right, sweetheart, Maria said, kneeling down to examine the chrysalis with appropriate wonder. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from the hardest transformations. Sarah appeared around the corner of the house, carrying a tray of lemonade and wearing the comfortable smile of someone who'd found their place in the world. She'd left Travis 3 days after that midnight scene. Not because of the money, but because she'd finally seen who her husband really was when his desperation stripped away all pretense. I hope you don't mind the mess, Sarah said, setting the tray down on the garden table. Emma's been helping me plant the children's section. The children's section. Sarah had suggested it 2 months ago when she'd moved into the guest house with Emma and her 8-year-old son Michael. A special corner of the garden where the grandchildren Maria had never been allowed to know could plant their own flowers and learn to nurture growing things. It was Sarah's way of making up for the years Travis had stolen from them all. Mess is what gardens are for, Maria said, accepting a glass of lemonade and settling into her favorite chair. How did the custody hearing go yesterday? Sarah's face brightened. The judge awarded me primary custody. Travis gets supervised visits every other weekend, but... She hesitated. But he's not taking them? He's been asking the kids questions about you during his visits. About the house, about your money, about whether you've mentioned him. Yesterday, Michael came home upset because Travis kept asking if Grandma Maria had said anything about making things right with Daddy. Maria's heart clenched. Even now, even after losing his family, Travis was still focused on the inheritance he'd forfeited through his own greed. What did you tell him? I told him that some people need time to grow up, and that grown-ups sometimes make mistakes that hurt the people they're supposed to love. Emma ran back over to them. Her attention already shifted to the sandbox Sarah had built near the roses. Can we call Grandma Dorothy? I want to tell her about my butterfly. Dorothy. Maria smiled at the mention of her dearest friend, Dorothy Whitmore from the shelter, who'd become like a sister to Maria in the months since her life had transformed. Dorothy was living in the small apartment above Maria's garage now, officially as a property caretaker, but really because Maria had learned that having family wasn't about blood. It was about people who chose to love you without conditions. After lunch, sweetheart. Grandma Dorothy is probably taking her afternoon nap. I'll go get Michael, Sarah said. He's been practicing piano in the music room. I think he wants to play something for you. As Sarah walked away, Maria reflected on the strange mathematics of love. Her beautiful home was fuller now than it had ever been, but not with the family she'd started with. Dorothy lived upstairs, helping manage the house and providing the kind of grandmother energy that Emma and Michael had been missing. Grace Fletcher, the volunteer from the shelter who shared Maria's surname, came by twice a week to help with correspondence and had become one of Maria's closest friends. Harrison Reed stopped by regularly, not as her lawyer, but as someone who genuinely cared about her welfare from the beginning. And then there were the others, the women from the shelter who'd found their way to Maria's table for Sunday dinners. Regina Montgomery, whose gambling-addicted son had cleaned out her savings. Linda Prescott, whose daughter-in-law had convinced her son that his mother was toxic. 3 other forgotten mothers who'd discovered that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. They called themselves the Butterfly Garden Society, women who'd emerged from the cocoons of their old lives transformed, beautiful, and free. Maria's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Angela's name appeared on the screen, the first time her daughter had called in 4 months. Hello, Angela. Mom. Angela's voice was different, smaller, more tentative, but also somehow cleaner than it had been in years. I was wondering if we could talk. Maria had been expecting this call. Angela's life had imploded completely after that midnight confrontation. Edward had left her within a week, unable to handle the social embarrassment of his wife's public attempt to steal from her elderly mother. Angela's charity work had dried up when word spread through their social circles. Their friends had abandoned them one by one. But more than that, Victor's will had included specific provisions for family members who attempted to steal from Maria. Angela had forfeited any possibility of ever receiving anything from her mother's inheritance, a clause that was ironclad and irreversible. What would you like to talk about, sweetheart? Angela's voice broke. I want to apologize. Really apologize. Not because I want something from you. I know I can never have anything from you again. and I understand why. But because I need you to know that I remember who I used to be, who you raised me to be. Maria closed her eyes, feeling the familiar war between hope and caution. I've been going to therapy, Angela continued. Real therapy, not the kind where you complain about your problems and expect someone else to fix them. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could treat you the way I did. And Mom, I'm so ashamed. I'm so sorry. What changed? Maria asked gently. Everything, Angela said simply. Edward left me, just like you said he would. But that wasn't the wake-up call. That was just the consequence. The wake-up call was when I realized that I'd tried to have you declared incompetent. You, the woman who raised 3 children alone, who worked 3 jobs, who sacrificed everything so we could have better lives. I tried to convince a court that you were too stupid to manage your own money. There was a long pause, filled with the weight of that realization. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Angela said quietly. I know I destroyed something precious, and Victor Holloway made sure I can never benefit from your generosity again. But I wanted you to know that I remember now. I remember the mother who worked herself to exhaustion so I could take dance classes. I remember the woman who sold her jewelry to pay for my wedding dress. I remember the person I was before greed turned me into a monster. Maria watched Emma playing in the sandbox, building castles, and then knocking them down just for the joy of building them again. Are you asking to see me, Angela? No. The answer came quickly, firmly. I know I lost that right. I'm asking for something smaller. I'm asking if you could maybe, not hate me. If you could maybe believe that somewhere inside me, your daughter still exists. It was, Maria realized, the first truly honest thing Angela had said to her in years. Where are you living? I rented a small apartment downtown. I got a job at a homeless shelter, not volunteering, working. Real work, cleaning, serving meals, helping people apply for benefits. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work helping people in the situation I helped put you in. And Travis? Daniel? Angela's sigh was heavy. Travis is getting worse, not better. He's convinced this is all temporary, that you're testing us and will eventually forgive us. He doesn't understand that some things can't be undone. And Daniel moved to Seattle the week after our midnight disaster. New job, new life, new identity. I think he's trying to pretend none of this ever happened, that he never had a mother at all. So Daniel had chosen complete escape over any form of accountability. It was disappointing but not surprising. Angela, Maria said carefully, I need you to understand something. Victor's will was very specific. Even if I wanted to help you financially someday, I can't. You forfeited that possibility forever when you tried to have me declared incompetent. I know, Angela said. Harrison Reed explained it all to me. And honestly, Mom, I'm glad. I'm glad there's no possibility of money between us ever again. I'm glad that if you ever decide to forgive me, it will be because you choose to love me, not because I might benefit from it. That's very mature of you. It's the least I can do. Mom, I love you. I know I showed the opposite of love, and I know words don't fix what I broke, but I need you to know that I love you. I always have, even when I was too selfish and greedy to show it. I love you too, sweetheart. I always have. After hanging up, Maria sat in her garden and watched her step-granddaughter play. Sarah emerged from the house with Michael, who was clutching sheet music and looking nervous. Are you ready for your concert, Maestro? Maria asked. Michael nodded solemnly. He was a serious boy, still processing his stepfather's behavior and his step-grandmother's sudden prominence in his life. But music seemed to unlock something joyful in him, and Maria had been delighted to discover his talent. As Michael played, a more complex piece by Bach that he'd been working on for months, Maria reflected on the strange mathematics of love and loss. She'd started with 3 children and had, through their own choices, lost them all. But now she was gaining them back in unexpected ways. Sarah and her children, who'd chosen love over blood loyalty. Angela, who was finally ready to do the hard work of becoming human again, even without any possibility of reward. The money had been a test, she realized now. Not just for her children, but for herself. She'd learned that wealth couldn't buy love, but it could reveal who was capable of it. It couldn't heal broken relationships, but it could provide the security needed to build new ones. Victor Holloway had given her more than money. He'd given her the power to see truth, the freedom to choose her family, and the resources to help others find their way home to themselves. When Michael finished his piece, Emma applauded wildly from her sandbox. Sarah beamed with pride, and Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The pure, uncomplicated joy of being surrounded by people who loved her for exactly who she was. "That was beautiful, sweetheart," she told Michael, who blushed and ducked his head. "Grandma Dorothy taught me the fingering for the hard part," he said shyly. "Did she? We'll have to thank her when she wakes up from her nap." As the afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting everything in golden light, Maria touched the pearls at her throat. Victor's reminder that beautiful things could emerge from life's most painful irritations. She'd lost the children she'd raised, but she'd found the family she was meant to have. She'd discovered that love, like butterflies, sometimes had to be completely transformed before it could truly fly. Tomorrow, she would continue her work with the Butterfly Garden Society, helping other forgotten mothers remember their worth. Angela would not be there. She'd forfeited that possibility through her own choices. But perhaps someday, when she'd done enough work on herself, they might meet for coffee. Not as mother and daughter seeking reconciliation, but as two women who'd learned hard lessons about the difference between love and ownership. The inheritance had been a gift, but not the one she'd first imagined. It hadn't bought her love. It had taught her that love couldn't be bought. It hadn't healed her family. It had shown her that sometimes you had to build a new one. Most importantly, it had given her something no amount of money could purchase. The knowledge that she was worthy of love, worthy of respect, worthy of a beautiful life. As Emma ran over to show her a flower she'd picked, as Michael played another song, as Sarah hummed along while setting the table for dinner, Maria smiled and thought of Victor Holloway. He'd been right about everything. The richest heart deserved a bank account to match. But more than that, it deserved to be surrounded by people who could see its value. And finally, after all these years of being the only parent her children had ever known, after sacrificing everything and receiving abandonment in return, Maria Fletcher was surrounded by love that asked for nothing but gave everything. If this story touched your heart, if Maria's journey reminded you of your own worth or the importance of choosing love over money, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if you discovered the people you loved most only valued you for what you could give them? Have you ever had to choose between blood family and chosen family? Your stories matter, your experiences matter, and this beautiful community we're building together matters. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button now. Not just for me, but for every Maria out there who needs to know that their story